Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theater Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, Robin Hood Radio's very own critic, feeling possessive again. He joins us weekly. The films: The Power of the Dog, Last and First Men, and Being the Ricardos. And how might you be?
I be just fine, thanks, Jill. How be you this week?
I'd be fine as well.
Very, very glad to hear it. Well, so we got three movies which are very, very different this week, and I would like to start off talking about The Power of the Dog, which is not a movie about a dog. The title comes from a biblical quotation. But even that kind of doesn't really give you an idea of what The Power of the Dog is about, because The Power of a Dog is actually a Western. It's interesting, this year, not many Westerns are made anymore, but this year there have been a couple of very good Westerns. There was one just a few weeks ago called Old Henry, which is a very, very good movie starring Tim Blake Nelson, and which I really like, a very old-fashioned kind of Western. And now we have The Power of the Dog, which is a more ambitious movie and not exactly an old-fashioned Western, although it is very much a Western. It is directed and written by Jane Campion, although it's based on a novel by Thomas Savage. And Jane Campion is the very, very fine New Zealand filmmaker who came along, way back around the 1980s, late 80s, making some really terrific movies, really, really gifted filmmaker. But this is, interestingly, her first movie, her first feature film in about a dozen years. She's had a long layoff from making movies. She made a very, very interesting TV miniseries called Top of the Lake. But this is her return to feature filmmaking, and it's a very, very interesting movie, and an unconventional movie, not only in that it is a Western, not a particularly popular genre nowadays, but this is a Western starring, get ready for this, Benedict Cumberbatch as a cowpoke, as a cowboy. I don't think of the very English Benedict Cumberbatch, particularly in terms of playing cowboys. But, he is just such a good actor. We've talked about him before, Jill. We like him, I think. And he is a powerful actor, and he can do pretty much anything. It turns out he can now even play a sort of a cowboy. So we have here this unconventional Western starring not only Benedict Cumberbatch, but also Jesse Plemons, another really, really good actor, and Kirsten Dunst, and another actor who is less known than those three, named Cody Smith-McPhee. And we have here, basically, it's a Western which is also a family story, and which is the story of a pretty bad dude. The character played by Benedict Cumberbatch, his name happens to be Phil, is not a very nice guy. So we have here these two brothers, played by Benedict Cumberbatch and Jesse Plemons. Their names are Phil and George, and they are ranchers. And George, the Jesse Plemons character, gets married to a woman named Rose, played by Kirsten Dunst, who has a son already, whose name is Peter, played by Cody Smith-McPhee. And right away, the Benedict Cumberbatch character just takes against the son of his brother's new wife, this son named Peter, who's a young man. And Peter appears to be a sort of a slightly effete sort of a character. He is not, shall we say, conspicuously masculine in the way of most Western characters, and certainly in the way of the kinds of people of whom Phil would approve. Phil is a rough, tough, mean, and sort of a nasty character even. And Peter is just the opposite. He's a young man. He is delicate. He likes to make flowers out of paper, things like that. So we have here a sort of an interesting sort of a suggestion of homosexual panic, perhaps, on the part of the Phil character. And anyway, various things develop among these three. There's definitely a rivalry between the two brothers. The Benedict Cumberbatch character and the Jesse Plemons character. There's tension with the new wife, played by Kirsten Dunst, and there is a whole lot of tension revolving around the character of the young man. He goes off to medical school at one point. However, he then comes back, and all kinds of things happen. Now, the most important thing to know about The Power of the Dog is not only that it's a Western, but that it is a very dreamlike film. It is a very, very strange, atmospheric sort of a movie in all kinds of ways. It is not at all like the old-fashioned Hollywood Western. It has this dreamlike, almost sort of, sometimes almost delirious sort of power to it, which I liked very, very much. I'm sure this will drive a lot of people crazy, however. If you think you're in for an old-fashioned Western here, or into a sort of a conventional action film of any kind, you are not going to find that here. Also, the ending of this movie has been very much discussed. It's oblique, it's indirect, it is not right in your face. You have to sort of figure it out for yourself a little bit. I found the whole movie really quite wonderful. I don't think it's a great film, but I think it's a fascinating film. I'm very, very glad that Jane Campion is back making feature films again, and I hope she makes many more and doesn't let another dozen years pass before she does another one. And the acting in this movie is simply marvelous by everybody. Once again, I'm going to mention the cast. Benedict Cumberbatch as the mean cowboy. Jesse Plemons is sort of the nice rancher. Kirsten Dunst as the wife who is sort of caught between these two. Cody Smith-McPhee in a fascinating performance as the young man who goes off to medical school and then comes back again. And it's a very, very interesting movie made with all kinds of atmospheric power. So again, an unconventional Western. If you like Westerns, you might like it a lot or you might dislike it, but I think it's definitely worth anybody checking out. It's a really, really interesting and beautifully made movie, beautifully crafted movie. Second film I'd like to talk about today briefly is really a specialty item, an unusual movie. It will not be opening at every multiplex everywhere, but it is definitely getting distribution in the United States. Last and First Men, which is a movie by an Icelandic director named Jóhann Jóhannsson, who has actually died a couple of years ago. And this was originally done as sort of a live show with images on the screen and an orchestra playing music composed by Jóhann Jóhannsson, who was primarily a composer. But what's most interesting for me about Last and First Men is that it is based on a novel of that title, which was written way back in 1930 by the very important English philosopher novelist, very, very fascinating character himself, named Olaf Stapledon. Who wrote science fiction novels that were very philosophical. And Last and First Men is a future history, sort of like H.G. Wells's famous novel, The Shape of Things to Come. And what it deals is the novel Last and First Men is supposedly coming to us from the far, far, far future, from someone who is reaching back into the past to tell us about the future of the human species as it unfolds, not over centuries, not even over millennia, but over hundreds of thousands of years. That's what Last First Men and First Men is all about. It tells about the human species, how it evolves, how it changes, how it moves to different planets over, again, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. That's what Last and First Men, the novel, is about. And that is really more or less what this movie is about, too. So the question might be, how do you make a movie that covers millions of years of history, and which is itself, by the way, very much to its credit, only a little over an hour long? Well, the answer is you do it by making a very unconventional movie in all kinds of ways. What we have here is a movie that consists primarily of just images of monuments and statues and sculptures, many of them filmed primarily in former Yugoslavia, where these monuments and statues and sculptures exist. And we have going over this a narration by Tilda Swinton, who is just such a fabulous actor, and she just has such a marvelous way of appearing in unconventional movies and doing unconventional things, and she's always willing to take a chance with an unusual project, an unusual director, an unusual movie. So what we have here basically is Tilda Swinton narrating this future history of the future of the human species while we see these monuments, these statues, these sculptures of various kinds. And we have this very, very, very interesting and unusual science fiction story, which is also a a caution to us human beings living here and now in the world, about the various things that might befall us, and also obviously turning our thoughts toward things like climate change and threats that might arise to our species, and how we really ought to be preparing for these things now, and that kind of thing. So I gotta stress that Last and First Men is a very unconventional movie. It's almost an experimental film, an avant-garde film. It does not do anything in conventional ways. It's based on a very unconventional novel, which is just barely a novel at all. It's more, again, of a sort of a made-up future history full of all sorts of cautionary notes to us about how we ought to be paying more attention to the threats that might arise to our species as time goes by. I had a really fascinating time watching Last and First Men. It's a marvelous movie. I hope it finds its way into many, many a home. It's going to be streaming eventually, and you'll be able to find it. If you're interested in science fiction, if you're interested in future history, if you're interested in the novelist Olaf Stapledon, who I think is quite wonderful, and if you're interested in music, because again, Jóhann Jóhannsson was primarily a composer, and the music for this film I found quite marvelous also, that goes along with Tilda Swinton's narration throughout. So again, a fascinating, unconventional, unusual movie, well worth seeking out. I had a very good time watching it. And our final movie for today, Jill, is called Being the Ricardos. And yep, it is about the Ricardos in the sense of I Love Lucy, the old TV show. And in fact, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz are the main characters of this movie. They are played by Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem, two terrific actors. So I was really looking forward to Being the Ricardos, and in a lot of ways I had a good time watching it, although there are things about it that I didn't really like very much, which I'll get to in a moment. The movie was written and directed by Aaron Sorkin, who, of course, is a filmmaker and TV maker with very strong political interests. So here we have a story of the making of the old I Love Lucy TV show, which is also a very political movie, because, of course, I Love Lucy, the old TV show, was very much a product of the 1950s. And another thing that was going on in the 1950s was the Great Red Scare, the great paranoia about communists taking over the world, taking over the United States, infiltrating everything, and all of that. So what happens at the very beginning of Being the Ricardos is that it is revealed to us that the great news and very real newspaper columnist of the period, Walter Winchell, has written a column in which he has revealed that Lucille Ball is a communist. Well, this sends the whole I Love Lucy operation into total panic, because in those days, back in the 1950s, being a communist or being a suspected communist or being even suspected of communism could end careers, could just throw everything in your life into total disruption. And now here was one of America's most famous newspaper columnists accusing Lucille Ball of being a communist. So what we have now in the movie Being the Ricardos is a week's worth of making a new episode of I Love Lucy, while at the same time everybody is worried about what the effects of this charge of communism, what's that going to do? And also we have the tension and the very fraught relationship of Lucille Ball and her husband and creative partner, Desi Arnaz. As one character says early in the film, they always seem to be either tearing each other's heads off or tearing each other's clothes off. And we have a whole lot of that in this movie. I don't mean it's a movie about sex or anything like that, but these two are obviously very dizzily in love with each other, but they also have a whole lot of tension between them, and there's a whole lot of arguing, and especially Lucille Ball is always accusing Desi Arnaz of being unfaithful to her, and what is he doing when he goes off on these things that he does when they're not together, and is he really, what this newspaper columnist says, is he really having an affair with this other actor, etc., etc., etc. So that's what Being the Ricardos is about. It's about the tension and the love between Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who are going, by the way, through a very fraught period, and it's about this making of an episode while they're also worrying about this charge of communism, all put together by Aaron Sorkin, who of course loves the political element of this as much as he loves any other element of it. I had a good time watching Being the Ricardos. I'm fascinated by 1950s sitcoms. I'm fascinated by 1950s culture. I'm fascinated by 1950s politics. So all of those things really engaged me. The one thing that's wrong with Being the Ricardos is that it is a very heavy-handed kind of a movie. And it reminded me in some ways of Aaron Sorkin's previous feature film, The Trial of the Chicago 7, another very political movie. And the trouble with The Trial of the Chicago Chicago 7, which was a very good movie most of the way, is that at the end, it has this huge, preposterous, over-the-top, really badly done triumphalist climax where everything comes out the way Aaron Sorkin wanted things to come out, and he just hits us over the head with it so hard. And he does the same thing at the end of Being the Ricardos. It's not only how the story comes out, it's the way it's handled. We are hit over the head with it. It's much too much. And it kind of spoils, in retrospect, a whole lot of what has come before. That said, except for that over-the-top climax, I really enjoyed watching most of Being the Ricardos. Again, you just can't go wrong with terrific actors like Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem. The supporting cast is really good, and if you have any interest in 1950s culture, you'll have a great time watching Being the Ricardos. It's a good movie. I only wish it were a great movie. And that is my somewhat lukewarm story this week, Jill.
For which we thank you, as ever and always, David Sterritt. Films in Focus, the films The Power of the Dog, Last and First Men, and Being the Ricardos.